Psychology and a Master of Social Work. She's recognized as a diplomate in clinical social work by the Academy of Certified Social Workers, the American Board of Medical Psychotherapists, and is a member of the National Association of Social Work. Most recently, after her mother's long journey with Alzheimer's disease and subsequent death, Sherry has written a book, The Girl, the Star, and the Spider, and has made it available in hopes that it will bring comfort to others as it has to her. Won't you please welcome Sherry Smelley.
This and this.
What?
You got one.
You want to stand on it?
No.
You want to stand on it?
I'll fall off.
This will advance it.
Okay. Great. Great. I am technologically challenged, so I'm going to be picking things up and putting them down, and I hope it all works. First of all, let me just say thank you, Barry, for this wonderful experience of the week and for allowing me to speak to you. And I also thank my wonderful illustrator who is here with me, Chris Anderson Gouldy, a friend since first grade. But I guess most of all, I just want to thank the people here. I was a little nervous. I thought, Friday, oh my gosh, I'm going to speak on Friday. And it scared me. And now I have decided, thank you, Barry, it has given me a gift. I feel like I'm talking to a group of friends. Everyone in this room, I think, has passed and given me a smile. Many have stopped and had conversations. There are wonderful people, and when I look out, I see them smile at me. I mean, it's almost like I'm sitting with friends. I think if I'd spoken on Monday, it would have been worse. There are, and I usually like to go first, but this is just wonderful. I met people on the plane. I met people in the halls. I met people at dinner. I met the speakers. I've just had a wonderful gift. I've found a couple of people who I think I may have a lifelong relationship with, a lifelong relationship. And I thank them for being my friends and befriending me, and I hope that we can hold on to each other forever. So, having said my thank yous, yes, I'm Sherry Smelley from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I have worked with serious life-threatening illness for over 23 years. I love that area. I was, in my former life, a mother of, not that I'm not still, but a mother of 4 sons and a piano teacher. And somewhere midway, I found myself sitting in a piano studio, listening to my students of all ages, talking more than they were playing. And I thought, I'm doing something that I don't know how to do here. But then I found out later, after I got my master's degree, that really what we do is listen. So maybe I was already starting down that path. Let me see if I can handle. Here we go. I won't read the educational objectives to you. You have them in your packet, but Peter told us early in the week, do what suits us. Whatever your personality calls you to do, I encourage my students at LSU. I teach grief and bereavement to graduate students. I've taught that every semester for 11 years. Graduate students who are about to finish a master's degree, and I tell them, as hard as this is for you to believe, the most important thing that you can do is trust your gut. Feel down here what you need to do and go with it. So I ask you to take what works for you from this presentation and leave what doesn't, and if there's some piece that you can modify, because I find that my clients, and that's what I hope to give you today, are some different techniques, because my clients, myself, the spoken word, as wonderful as it is inadequate to express, to voice the pain of grief. And they walk around, and most of the time, people, when asked how they're doing, they say, what? Fine. By the way, I got an acronym for that for a woman who was dying of cancer. She said, I keep telling people I'm fine, but I feel like I'm lying. And I said, well, we need to figure out a way where you feel that at least you're being true to yourself, because she didn't want to talk with them. So I said, well, let's see, F-I-N-E. F, well, I know an F word. So let's do the effing. I, insecure, neurotic, and exhausted. So she told people for a long time she was fine, and it worked well. But we want to know, where are we? Where are we going? How did we get here? How are we going to make sense of this? People need to make sense of the nonsense. They want to understand, and many things are not understandable, and they want to know if they'll survive the journey. So let me begin with this slide. Home is where your story begins. I have a story. You've heard lots of stories this week, but everyone in this room has a story, and I've been privileged this week to hear many of them as we've chatted. Every one of our clients has a story, and every story is interesting. And we are simply that, our stories, our memories, our connection, the people that we meet, our journeys, the times, the places, the good and the bad. We are our stories. Lewis told us that there were 4 words that drop us down into another level of consciousness. And we're going to use those and hear those today during this presentation some. And it's the once upon a time. I think we all have a story that is a once upon a time. My story, that's my mom, my dad. It's the only slide I have of them for you today. My dad was almost 90 on that. It was a couple of days before his birthday. Isn't he cute? Don't you love his blue eyes? His Pantene hair, that's what the nurses in the hospital, when he would go in and out, would call it. He was wonderful. He gave love and safety. He was strong like a rock, but very kind. My mother, gentle, soft, almost like being wrapped in lamb's wool. He died September 10th, 2001. That's right, September 10th, the day before 2011. People ask me, what was that like for you, your father dying the day before September 11th? I want to tell you that it was perfect, because the next day the whole world stopped and grieved with me. Auden says, make all the planes stop and the phone stop ringing. You want the world to stop when you're experiencing grief. And for me, that's what happened. My mother had already begun some forgetting. I did her checkbook for and those kinds of things. But she was still driving a little and getting my dad here and there. But the day my dad died, it was as if my mother jumped off a cliff into her disease of the forgetting. Her memories, her mind slipped. Slowly, slowly, she began to fade. So it was almost like I lost them both at the same time. This is not just my story, these changing demographics that have been a part of my life, but it is the story of our nation. It is the story of you. It is a different world, and our nation sits poised trying to deal with this. Our life expectancy rate, our mortality rates, we're living a very long time. And I say yay for that, but at the same time, we will deal with an aging body. In 1900, the average lifespan for people was 40. Well, you didn't have time to get Alzheimer's by the time you were 40, or dementias, or a lot of other things. Many cancers don't occur until a person's well up 60s, 70s. In fact, the best cancer you can get is one that doesn't show up till you're 80 plus, because it's a very slow growing cancer. We have changes with our aging population. We even classify them differently. We don't call, as I did when I was a child, if you were 60, you were old. But we don't go by birthdays anymore, and it's a good thing since I'm 64. But we don't go by birthdays anymore. We have them classified by function. People are old, They're young old, young old, and old. And you know some people who are 90 and they're still very young old. Very active, and I hear some chuckling, so yeah. And you may know some people who are 50 who are already old. There are people who almost are born old. We have smaller families. We have women in the workplace. We have a geographic mobility. People move away from home. I have 4 sons. One of them lived several years in Australia, California. I mean, they're all over the place, just like your children are. There's the rise of healthcare and support institutions. People used to be cared for in the home with women who didn't work, medication advances, and we have chronic illness today as opposed to the acute illnesses that killed us in the past. By the age of 65, the research shows that the average person has 3 chronic illnesses. So with all these changing demographics, we also have changes in the way we grieve. We grieve things differently, but yet we grieve the same. And I'm going to talk about that. So what is this thing, grief? I want you to understand that I believe grief is simply an expression of love. Now, grief is not depression. Grief is sadness. Now, sometimes a prolonged or complicated grief can turn into depression, but grief is a sign of health. When someone says, I want to stop crying, I can't understand why I'm so sad, I said, it's because you loved so deeply. I don't want their lives to stop, but I mean, when I'm being lowered or cremated or whatever it is after death of my body, I want my sons to cry a little. I mean, I want to be missed. I want it to have been important to them that I'm here and that I'm gone. And I don't want them to sit in their grief. I don't want them to have prolonged grief. But I want them to be able to express their love. Grief is an expression of love. And there's only one way to avoid grief. That would be then to avoid love. That's the only way to avoid grief. It's to avoid love. And that's unthinkable, though many of you have clients, many of you have had experiences with people where you know, I'll never be hurt like that again, they say. So they start to build walls. Grief is an expression of love. Remember, with this grief thing, with this loss, with this love, once we make a decision to love, we set ourselves up to experience grief. We live in a world where it's unavoidable. Much like the life storms that we have. I live in South Louisiana, Katrina 2005. We prepare for hurricanes or the chance of hurricanes every year. We have our batteries and our water, and we have an escape plan if we're told to evacuate. We know how to prepare to minimize the damage. But there is no scientific ability to this day that man has to be able to still a storm, quiet a storm, reduce a storm, or make a storm go away. I think in life it's kind of like that. The storms come, and our best hope is that we prepare for the storms in a way that minimizes the damage. And that's what I try to do, as I'm sure you do with your clients. I saw grief drinking a cup of sorrow and called out, "It tastes sweet, does it not?" "You've caught me," grief answered, "and you've ruined my business. How can I sell sorrow when you know it's a blessing?" How can I sell sorrow when you know it's a blessing? Rumi. Life is both more and less than we've hoped for. It is, without a doubt, like Yates said, we are fastened to a dying animal. We come here on our way, on our march to death. And the world has for us on the journey madness and mayhem, magic and monsters. We have to learn how to live with the uncertainty and the mystery. The best, most healthiest societies and individuals are the ones who can hold life and death at the same time. That's why persons who are my clients in their 40s and 50s, they're diagnosed with cancer, and they say, for the first time in my life, I know that I'm mortal. Now, that's not knowing that they're mortal here, it's knowing that they're mortal here. They know they can die. And they are the ones who wake up to life. The ones who have not understood that they could die. It's like giving someone a purse with unlimited money and saying, it's magic. The more you take out and spend, the more money will show up in the purse. How would one learn to value what the purse held for them? It has to be that we understand life does have an end. There will be an August 5th some year that will be my last August 5th, the last chance for a cool Santa Fe morning and a walk to this wonderful conference. And none of us know when that day is going to be. None of us know when that day will be. What we know is that everyone grieves. The anthropological studies show us that there is no group of people that does not experience grief. But it is a learned response in that everybody grieves differently. Most of us grieve like we observed our parents and our families grieving. Thank you very much for coming. That's what my family did. Thank you very much for coming. And we shook hands as people came through a line. I mean, the weeping was quieter, silenter, but we know that there are communities probably wiser than mine that wail and scream and moan. Some even display seizures, and some are stoic and display nothing. But that grief is in there. There is no doubt about that. So for those of you who work with grief, and I believe that we all work with grief, because loss is not just about death, loss is about today being different from our yesterday. It's divorce, it's any kind of dissolution, it's loss of a prized possession, loss of a job, it's any kind of change that one goes through, one then grieves. But grief might be the most intensely painful experience that a person has. So our work is challenged because most of us entered this field in order to hopefully help others somehow benefit from the relationship. But grief seems to preclude our ability to do that. Bowlby states in the grief literature that the loss of a loved one is the most intensely painful experience any human can suffer. Not only is it painful to experience, but painful to witness, if only because we're so impotent to help. There's a quote from The Invitation, one of my favorite poems, Oriah Mountain Dreamer. Some of you may be familiar with that. And the line says, I want to know if you have touched the center of your own sorrow and been opened by life's betrayals, or you become closed and shriveled from fear of further pain. Being around people that grieve is difficult. It's hard. They want to know, another line from her poem, if we can stand in the center of the fire with them and not shrink back. I've had clients come to me that are like, well, you're the third therapist I've been to, and I've got such a horrible story that when I tried to tell it to others, the look on their face made me uncomfortable. I think that each of us has some kind of grief journey that is difficult for us. It is difficult for us, and we have to know what those limitations are and where our strengths are. I'm sort of the grief person in Baton Rouge, and I've done it a long, long time. But even me, there are cases, August of last year, I saw in the paper on the news that a young woman had two small children, preschool babies, and they were staying the night at the grandparents' home, and the house caught on fire, and all four burned. Very quickly, I don't like to do grief work in the first few days. I just rather wait let them have a chance for the shock. And Monday morning, I got a call, a message left on my machine from this young mother. Could I make an appointment? I was terrified. I was terrified. I really had to do a lot of self-work to prepare for her, because that's, you know what I mean. Well, I'm here to tell you that in June of this year, I got a text from her after a lot of work and a lot of pain. And I'll talk more about painful joy with a picture attached of a newborn. She had another child, and she named the child after the two children who had died, and she said, is sitting here with painful joy. It is difficult, but thank you for helping me get to this place. So we have to work to be ready for those clients that frighten even us. One draught of Lethe for a world of pain, an easy bargain, yet I keep the thorn to keep the rose. Lethe is a mythical river in Hades, and the way the story goes, if you drink from the river Lethe, you'll forget everything. All the pain is gone. The problem with that is that all the joy is gone. All the memories are gone. So when we think we want to get rid of the pain, we have to remember that to get rid of that. Anyone see The Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind? It's a Jim Carrey, a couple of people. It's not your typical Jim Carrey piece, but it is that struggle with, do I drink from the river Lethe? So I recommend to you that you assess and enhance your own readiness to do grief work on a regular basis. It is essential, our self-awareness, our understanding, our own grief history, our real losses, those losses I have experienced, our own feared losses, those that I fear, all of us. I mean, some in this room, I'm sure, have already lost a child, but how many of us fear that all the time, and even when they were young? It's one of our greatest fears, one of our greatest fears. And then our own mortality, we need to examine that. I have a grief inventory in the handouts, also in the CD, and I recommend that you use that grief inventory for yourself personally, to keep yourself ready, just like we heard about exercise and eating and diet. A grief inventory is a really good thing. There are 15 points on it, and I really encourage you to do that on a routine basis. I do. Chronic sorrow is different from the grief where we get the phone call. Not that it's worse, not that it's better, but it is different. It is different in many ways than the one where we get the phone call and we have to identify the body. Chronic grief, I want to read from the bottom of this slide. Chronic sorrow is what exists when the person we love is physically present but is now changed by aging, illness, or trauma. So the person's still there, whether it's aging, illness, trauma. In my personal journey, it was Alzheimer's. And it sometimes is called compassion fatigue in the literature. It's studied as the cost of caring. Because I would tell people, those that I didn't say fine to, those others that I really wanted to let inside, I would say with my mother's Alzheimer's, because she declined so rapidly that she spent the last 7 years of her life in a nursing home. Something I thought, a choice I thought I would never make. But I would tell those people, it felt like every day I got up to attend a wake. That viewing, that time that we call it a wake in South Louisiana, but there was never a funeral. But every day there was the wake. So chronic sorrow is different. And it also makes us feel the loss for the fantasies, the loss for her. She would travel with. If my mom were here, well, I think she is, but she would have come with me. She loved going with me, and she'd be grinning from some corner. I could trip and fall off the stage, and she'd tell me, "Good job." So there's the loss for myself, there's the loss for her, all of those things. But it also, this chronic sorrow, all you have to do is pick out a casket if you get the phone call, and I'm not minimizing that. I take my students to the casket room in my grief class, my death and dying. I prefer to call it life and living. But you have to make hard decisions, and if you have not made those for your children, I suggest that you do it now. no matter how young and healthy each of us is in this room, because otherwise it will fall on the children to make those decisions. The powers of attorney, the living wills, the end of life issues. What kind of interventions do we do now? The long care decisions. There's a wonderful document, I didn't put it in the slides, but if you haven't seen it, it's called 5 Wishes. And it is an end-of-life, a living will document, not like the one-page legal piece that we have in Louisiana that you can fill out and blah, blah, blah. But it's beautiful. It says, I want people, as I'm in my last days, to play my favorite music. You check what you want, read my favorite poems, rub my hands with lotion, keep my lips moist. It's a wonderful, wonderful document. So it's called 5 Wishes. You can Google that. In the middle of my life journey, in the middle of your life journey, in the middle of everyone's life journey, in the middle of my life journey, I found myself in a dark wood. The light and the dark that every human life is made of, happy, sad, magic, monsters. How do we think about this rhythm? Because how we think about it is going to make all the difference. I do not believe that we choose many things in life. I think many things choose us. This dark night chooses us. It is given to us. And each of us has had many painful experiences. You cannot live life without having had that. Toward the end of my mother's own disease journey, I was not sure if she even knew me. She rarely spoke. Most of it was not understandable. She could not feed herself. She was incontinent, bowel, bladder. She hadn't walked in years. She was totally dependent, and that lasted for years. People would say to me, how wonderful your mom is doing today. She seems just so happy. And I would wonder, who are they talking about? My mom was the valedictorian. My mom read poetry. She recited long pieces from memory. She went to the doctor, and she told the doctor, I think, early, I think I'm forgetting. I think something's wrong with my mind. And he said, well, name the presidents backwards. You know. And she named them, starting with the sitting president, went back to Eisenhower, and he said, well, you did better than I could, Miss Alice. She said, but you don't understand. I could remember the presidents. I could remember all the cabinet members, and I know what universities they attended. That was my mother. So how does one go on day after day, month after month, year after year, loving yet longing? The journey for this began many years before it ended. One of my sons gave me this plaque, well, not that plaque, but these words on a plaque. It's not about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain. It is important with clients who are experiencing chronic sorrow that they learn how to create joy in the middle of the storm. By the way, that's my house. I picked this slide because it was the dead of winter, and I had a foolish little plum tree that decided it was spring and bloomed in the dead of winter. I thought that was just perfect for this slide. It is a fearful thing to love what death can touch. It is a fearful thing to love what death can touch. To love, to hope, to dream, and oh, to lose. The thing for fools is this, love. But a holy thing to love what death can touch. For your life has lifted me, your words have lifted me, your laugh was a gift to me. To remember this brings painful joy. To remember this brings painful joy. It is a human thing to love. A holy thing to love what death can touch. Well, as you can see, I got the love of literature, poetry, words from my mother. She introduced these to me at a young age. She told me she read poetry to me as I lay on the bassinet. She changed my diaper. Great pieces of literature. And she said, I love them. So they're discoveries that I have stumbled into, and I like that word. I think as therapists, we need to understand that some of our best work we stumble into. It's not out of a textbook on a shelf. It's not from our graduate school, but it is stumbling. And I'm quite the stumbler. So first, of course, remember diet, exercise, sleep, friends, family, support groups, respite. All of those things are important. But I find that it's imperative to help our clients, to help ourselves create a voice, an outlet for the pain and grief that we experience. If it's not expressed, it will pop out. It will come out physically, emotionally. People will get sick, mind, heart, spirit. There's some important research that, it's there. But we have to find what works. Sit with your client long enough to figure out where their strengths are, what their loves are, what their interests are, and it'll come to you if you trust your gut. And remember the comfort of painful joy. And there's no way to avoid that if they have loved. And I don't know about you, but I have a box of tissue in my office, but it sits on a corner table, and I never offer it to anyone. I never push the box to them, I never hand them a Kleenex, because when someone hands me a Kleenex, when someone hands you a Kleenex and you've got tears, what are they saying to do? Dry it up. Dry it up. So I have it sitting on the table, and sometimes a new client is a little intimidated by the tissue. They look, I know how you have the same thing. They look around the office, they find a spot where they want to sit. Some sit in a chair, some sit on the couch. I love it when they sit in a chair because I get the couch. And then they see the tissue and they say, am I going to cry? And I say, well, I don't know. You might. I might. I don't know. They're just there. But I believe tears are an expression of love. And I don't think anybody can make you cry. I think you're already crying on the inside. So when someone says something to you, they touch your arm and say, I love you, how are you doing? And a tear comes down your cheek. I think that it is a special link that you have with that person because you trust them enough to show your emotion, your tears, your love. So I think that this grieving that we do helps us connect with God, with the spiritual. Because I believe, in simple words, that when we feel love, that is that God peace. Call God higher power, call whatever you want, something bigger than us. And I think that love is there when we feel grief. Because remember, grief is simply an expression of love. And I think it also takes us to creative places. I believe that our wounds are the places where God, creativity, touches us. So, how do we create the voice? Well, these are some ways, and I'm going to examine them briefly individually. First, we can leave messages while there's time. I recommend this to all of you in this room. Leave things right now. Write little notes. Hide them in your pockets of your dresses in your closet and your books. Slip the cards into them. Write letters to your children. I write love letters and hang them on the Christmas tree to all of my children. I want them to have something in writing that they can remember. Words are wonderful, but how many of you can recall the exact words that your mother, your father told you when you were 10? On a day they were telling you, oh, well, you've got my mother's mind, if you can remember that. I just remember the general. But my mother was brilliant at that. Ethical wills, it's a new thing. I encourage you to look it up. You might even be able to use it in your practice. It's different from the typical will. It's not about I leave you my pocket watch and you get the Rolls Royce. It's I leave you the legacy of strength and courage that I inherited from your father and your father before him. It's a wonderful, wonderful idea to use with clients. It's called an ethical will. Music helps to create the voice as well in so many ways. And music, even for the declining mind, is the last to go. So I want you to know that they will remember the little simple songs and the words way, way after they've forgotten your name. Art, collage, sketch journals. I call it Letters to Sherry. I'll tell you a little more about that. And then storytelling, story reading, story writing. You know, I told you that my mother left me things. I want to share this with you. I have been afraid to throw away anything without going through it, and I had many years to go through her things because she left before she left. And about 2 years before her death, there was a stack of books. She had tons of books. She went to book bazaars and bought them for $0.25, and I just would bring them home and stack them up. She loved books. And so I had a stack that was going to go to the Goodwill store. By the way, you can't keep everything. The literature calls that mummification, when people try to keep everything. So this stack of books was going to the Goodwill store, and just before loading it, there was something that said to me, a spirit that spoke to me and said, open up the inside cover. I opened up the inside cover, and in her words, in her handwriting, it said, read 427. I don't know how long ago she wrote that in the front of that book, but it was a long, long time before that day in time. This is what 427 said to me, almost as if my mother found a way to comfort me, to have a voice when I had not heard her voice in so many years. Remember me when I am gone away, gone far away into the silent land, when you could no more hold me by the hand, nor I have turned to go, yet turning stay. Remember me when no more day by day you tell me of our future that you'd planned. Only remember me, you understand. It will be too late to counsel then or pray, yet if you should forget me for a while, and afterwards remember, do not grieve. For if the darkness and corruption leave a vestige of the thoughts that once I had, better by far you should forget and smile than that you should remember and be sad. Read 427. A gift from her. Did she somehow know many years ago that I would need this? Did she know where she was going when she was 50 or 60 or whatever age? I don't think. Just write the notes, leave little messages. There's a way that I don't understand. It's a mystery, but the messages that we need will find us. They'll find us. So then, music. How many know it is well with my soul? It is well with my soul. It's a beautiful hymn. It was written by a man named Spafford. He'd had several traumatic events in his life. In 1871, his only son died. And then shortly after that, the Chicago fire occurred. That's where he lived. And he lost his business and all of his resources. It ruined him financially. In 1873, 2 years later, he decided it was time to go back to Europe, and he wanted his wife and 4 daughters to precede him on that journey. So he followed later. While the family, the wife and 4 children, were crossing the Atlantic, they hit another ship, and their ship sunk. There's a now famous telegram, said, survived alone. All 4 daughters died. He immediately caught the next ocean liner to join his wife, and he asked the captain of the ship to let him know when they got to the exact place in the ocean where his daughters had died. And he stood on that ship and he wrote, when peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. Trying to find a way to make it okay, this stuff that's not okay, is just, it seems so very important to us. I have a client who's dying, speaking of music, Three young women, in fact, right now in my practice, around 40, with young children, and trying to help them prepare in their way for their journey. She has an iPod, and she has decided, because music has always been a part of her life, she's collecting her top 100 favorite songs and recording them to leave in that special box for her 13-year-old daughter. She says the music will help her remember her mother and who she was. So she is really having a wonderful time trying to create some memory for this daughter. Use music. Use art. There it went. I might have pushed it twice. If I did, I'll have to go back. I spent a week at Harvard Medical School, and that was just a wonderful time. Mind-body medicine program there is just amazing. And this is a life map that we made. Each of us made our own, and I won't bore you with the details of mine, but it's simply a map. I teach this in my class. I do it with clients. You can see you don't have to be a Picasso. Well, maybe it is a little Picasso-esque, but you don't really have to be a great artist. That starts, and that's all I'll do, with the little blonde-haired naked girl on the blanket under the magic forest. That's me at the beginning of the journey, and you see where my journey ends? It ends right back where I started. I did this crazy thing called deathclock.com. You know, I teach death and dying, so I'm all fixated with it. Anyway, I'm going to live to 103. And so that says 103, joy, back right at the place where. Crazy thing about doing a life map or kind of setting some goals in your mind. I did not live there then, but I showed on my life map that I was back where I started, and I've since built a home back on the very property that I lived when I was born. So be careful about what you wish for. I do collages with clients because collages are a wonderful way to help them put some sort of pictures for the emotions that they're feeling when words are inadequate. Had an architect with MS, and he had lost his ability to really do the work, but he started with larger objects, throwing pots, not the refined work because he didn't have that skill left. He called his little cottage industry the cracked pot. Sometimes I just hand clients, when I start talking about let's try some art, and they get all big-eyed, deer in the headlights or whatever look, and I just hand them a box of crayons and I say, pick the color you're feeling right now. That's art therapy, and they pick the color. Or does the color pick them? So then there's writing. I want to skip through these quickly, but there's just so much. So there's journaling. We know that with much research that's been done, if people write out what is inside them internally, if they write it out, we can actually see an improvement in their immune system. Blood sample before they write, blood sample after, their immune system is healthier. This is not woo-woo, ooh, it's up there in the head somewhere. Our minds, our bodies are so connected. Poetry. And I believe poetry is to be read out loud. If my clients write poems, I ask them if they will read them to me out loud. And if they say, no, but you can, I am honored to do that. I did find something, I stumbled on it, and I won't read but just a sentence or two. But when my mother had gone into her darkness, I missed her talking to me. Many of us have the practice, and some of you may do this as well, but you have the practice where you have people write letters to someone else. And not that they have to read it, but you write it to them. Well, what I did one day, because I just kept talking to my mother, reading to my mother, spending time with my mother, but my mother wasn't there for me. So I started a journal where after every visit, my mother would write me a letter. My dearest daughter, this one starts. Many times we visited since I last wrote you. Today you came and knelt by my bed reading again from books of poetry and prose. I loved it so. That's what my mother would have said if she could have. I knew that, so why would I not do that? So I encourage you to use that yourself and use it with your clients. Write a letter from the other side, back, not just this way. Not just this way. Had a woman who buried a 12-year-old son. He died of leukemia. And the only time we really started anything significant with her healing in her grief was when she had her son write the letter back to her. She knew her son. She knew what he would say. He said it in her letter. Make lists, notes, leave them everywhere, and lots of storytelling. Myth, fable, fairy tale has a long, long history. This we've heard about this week, Persephone. When people couldn't explain things, the unexplainable, they made up a story. You know the story about Persephone. She was the daughter of Zeus and Demeter. Demeter was the goddess of all harvest. She made things grow. They were green and lush. Everything was wonderful. And she and Zeus had this beautiful daughter. And the god of the underworld, Pluto, he saw her. He said, "Ooh, wow, she is some beautiful woman." Went to her dad, Zeus, and says, "I'd like her for my wife." Zeus says, "Oh, sure." So he took her away from her mother, Demeter, down into Hades. Demeter was so sad that she caused everything on the earth to die: cold, snow, ice, darkness. And Zeus kind of looked around. Nothing was blooming, nothing was green. There wasn't any sun. It was all snow, and he said, "I don't think this is going to work." So he went down to the god of the underworld, and he said, "Okay, here's how it's going to work. You get her for 6 months, and then I'm going to give her back to her mom for 6 months." So we have the first of spring. That would be March 20th. And Demeter gets her daughter back, Persephone, and everything starts to bloom. We have spring, we have summer, and then her husband gets her back, and we have fall and winter. You see how wonderful it was to be able to create a story that explained the unexplainable. So every spring, Persephone returns. So the once upon a time, and they lived happily after. These stories have been around for centuries. They've given us comfort in our darkness. I think that these kinds of stories, fairy tale and fable, are effective because they're simple. These concepts are easy. And in our significant pain, we really cannot grasp an 800-page volume of some book on grief. We need something simpler. I actually read children's stories to adults. I try not to insult them when I pull them out. I say, "I'm going to read something to you." So I call them cleverly disguised pieces of adult literature. Seems to work. So I do believe that creation comes from the chaos, and our wounds are the places where God touches us. My sweet mother died the last day of winter. My mother died the last day of winter, March 19th. 2009. We had been in winter many years, and the next day was spring for us both. After her death, I really struggled with how I was going to integrate it all, because I thought I was done with the grieving, right? Anticipatory grief, we know about that. But it was a whole different kind of grief. And I got an email one day inviting members of a storyteller group at Louisiana State University to come to the next meeting with an original fairy tale. I sat down in a chair and I cried. How was I going to come up with a fairy tale in the middle of my grief? And I'm journaling. And all of a sudden I wrote, "Once upon a time, once upon a time." And the girl, the star, and the spider was born, and it comforted me. I wrote it in one sitting. It did not come from me. It came from all of me, all of my memories, from some other place beyond. But I would like to take a moment and read this to you now. It is a cleverly disguised piece of adult literature. The cover says, "A fairy tale for grown-ups." A fairy tale for grown-ups. The Girl, the Star, and the Spider. Once upon a time, a girl was born into a world of darkness and despair. Before she was even 10 years old, her mother died, leaving a dozen children with their poor, poor father, who was unable to feed his hungry children. He sent word out to the village that children were for sale. That evening, the girl, so afraid of her fate, looked up into the heavens and spotted a star in the night sky, a star brighter than all the rest. She clasped her hands together, she closed her eyes, and she wished upon that star. Please help me, star. Please keep me safe. Please keep me surrounded by a big love such as my mother's. And finally, star, let me one day have my own family and be blessed to live to be old and see all my children grown. The room grew bright. The girl sensed something present but was almost too afraid to peek. She slowly opened her eyes, and there before her was the star, the very star she had just wished upon. The star said, I heard your plea, and I have come. I have the power to grant your 3 wishes, but there will be a price to pay. Anything, the girl said, no price would be too great. To be safe, to be surrounded by love this big, and to grow old with my very own family and my children. Not so fast, said the star. You've not heard the price for these. Please tell me, she said, please tell me. Oh, you will be safe. You will grow old with your family. You will have this great love all of your life for others and they for you. But one day when you are old, very, very old, the star spider will come and spin webs in your head. Slowly, 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 stealing your memories. The star nodded as she continued with a serious look on her face. Oh, you will be safe. You will have your family. You will love and be loved, a big, big love. But remember, by the time you grow very old and die, you will remember all this no more. I'll take the deal, the girl said. Sign here, said the star, and then rolled up the scroll and disappeared into the night sky. The next day, as the girl feared, a strange man and woman came to her father's home, and she was taken away. They were not unkind to her. She had food to eat, books to read, and she grew, and she grew, and she grew. The girl was soon a young woman and realized that the very first wish upon the star had in fact been granted so far. She had been safe. She then began to consider the second wish, and suddenly, almost like magic, a handsome young prince appeared. They fell deeply in love and vowed till death do us part. Children were born, birds sang in her sky, and flowers bloomed on her path. She was happy, safe, and loved. The gift of the second wish was unfolding. The girl loved her world and her family, and they all loved her. The children grew, and they even married and had children of their own. They often remarked to each other they felt so safe, so loved, just being close to their mother, the girl. The girl kept the star's visit and her agreement locked carefully in her heart all these years. She told no one, not even the prince. She grew older, weaker, frailer. She secretly hoped that the star would forget the promise she made. But no, it was not to be. One lovely spring day, the girl, now an old woman, heard a knock at the door. There stood the star with the spider at her side. Please, no, she said. I do not ever want to forget my family or to leave them. Please do not take my memories. But the star said, you made a promise, and now it's time. The girl understood. She understood a promise, honor, character, courage. These were strong within her, so she said, let it begin. Slowly, ever so slowly, the spider began to weave the web and wall off her memories. First, she could not remember what she had for lunch or the way to the store, if she paid her bills or washed her clothes. Yet all of this was okay with the girl because she still knew her family and she cherished their memories. Yet slowly, slowly, even these began to fade. One dark day, her prince left her side, and the spider's weaving got faster and faster, and her world became dimmer and dimmer, darker and darker. Her family was so sad and grieved so deeply. Day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, the weaving continued. Finally, the day came when she remembered no more, and the star came to take the girl. The girl recognized the star immediately. I knew how hard this would be for you and your family, the star said. Yet a love such as yours could only leave this world a thread at a time. If love the size of yours had left all at once, there would have been such a hole that heaven and earth would have been sucked in. I knew this when you called upon me all those years ago, and I realized that to grant your wishes, this would be the only way for you to let go of your family and they of you. Look down, girl. See? They stand in a circle. The brilliant glow around them is the love you left in their hearts. Your love was so strong, so big, it stayed even after you left. And her family lived happily ever after, most days. There's a little afterward. There's a little afterword that explains it in this simple book. I've also added questions for reflection and discussion in the area where I live. It's used in groups. It's used by therapists. I'm sure many of you keep simple little books in your offices that you hand out to clients. It's a wonderful piece. I've actually made it available. People say that is ridiculous, Sherry. You can get it online for $6 plus shipping, which makes it $10, but I did think that many therapists might want some, so I brought some. You can have it for $5, no shipping, out at a table, and most people, I don't know if you do that, but I do keep several copies of things in my office, and it also has a page after the questions. Well, I don't have that, but with resources. So it's a pretty comprehensive, little tiny, it won't weigh much in your luggage if you decide you want one. I don't really care if you have $20 buy 4, if you have $5 buy 1. If you've spent everything during this glorious week, I will give you a copy. I just want people to be comforted by it as I've seen its magic work. Deeper meaning resides in the fairy tales told to me in my childhood than in any truth that is taught in life. There is something about this fairy tale that is not really able to be understood. Just as my mother wrote 427, read 427, and you all raised your hands the other day when you were asked if you'd had these experiences that defy any kind of rational explanation. I want to end with one last thing. The world is a place of suffering, pain, injustice. We've talked about that this week. We know that love, kindness, goodness doesn't always prevail. It's life. Myths and fairy tales help us to get by, and without these, the world would be a poorer, less enchanted place. There are times when we need to believe in things that we know not to be true. And then there are times when we just need to believe. Once upon a time, there was a woman. You've all heard many stories from your clients similar to this, but I want to tell you this one now. Once upon a time, there was a woman. Her father had recently died. Her mother had rapidly become very ill. She loved them both, and she was filled with great sorrow. And she began to ask the questions of the ages. Okay, let me make sure I'm on the right slide here. Yep, she began to ask the questions of the ages, the age-old questions that everyone has asked since the beginning of time. She begged, she pleaded, she beseeched, she talked to God, and she says, I just want to know, is there life after death? I know nobody knows that, and I know that, we have this faith and we have this belief, and, it doesn't make sense because, laws of physics say no matter's either, created or destroyed, so we've got to still be here somewhere. But she began to ask this question. She got on a plane and she headed by herself without any other persons accompanying her to San Diego. And on the plane, she furiously wrote in a journal letters to God. I want to know, please tell me the answer. I know I don't really, who am I to think I would get the answer, but I really want to talk with you, God. She got off the plane, she went to her hotel, she checked in. She went to the front desk. Now remember, this is California. She went to the front desk and she said, I'd like to talk to God. Could you give me direction? And the clerk said, go out the front door. take a left. There's this wonderful park, and if you can't find, with lookouts over the Pacific, if you can't find God there, you're not going to find God anywhere. So this woman went out the front door, and she walked up a little piece, and she got to this beautiful park. And she said, yep, we're right on track. She said, the way the park was structured, it was a state park or a national, I think it was a state park. And she said, I'd get in these little clearings, and there would be like a spokes on a wheel, this hub, and I would stand there and say, okay, God, I'm coming to talk to you. Which path do I take? She's talking out loud. Thank goodness there were not any people around, but talking out loud, wouldn't have cared if there were. And one path would call her name, and she'd take that path. She ended up at a little structure, a pier, the cliffs of the California coast, up high on the cliff, looking out over the railing, and there were a number of these there. This is the one she was called to visit. She stood at the edge of the railing, and she looked out at the Pacific Ocean, and she said, okay, God, I'm here. How about that talk? I want to know, is it like the ocean? It looks like it ends. They thought for centuries that the world was flat and you just fell off. But I know that there's more. It curves. There's more on the other side. Is that how it is, God? Is there life after death? She walked back. At the back end of this was a little structure with a bench. Sat down on the bench and continued to write in her journal. When she sat down, there was an old woman to her left, and the old woman said to her, this is a very spiritual place. She said the woman left. She never saw her again. She doesn't know who she was, or she didn't know anything about her, but that's just part of the story. She said that she looked up the coast to the right, and she was just enjoying it, knowing that she was not going to leave until God talked to her. In fact, she said she told God that. I'm not leaving till you talk to me, God. Sitting here, waiting for the answer. Looked up the coast to the right, as she said. Most people called my dad, his name was Robert, but most people called him Bob. I guess what I'm here, God, wanting to know is, does Bob live? As she looked up the coast to the right, her eyes landed on the railing next to her. Carved in the wood, Bob lives. Carved in the wood, Bob lives. Well, I know this story's true because this is my story. It's not a client. It's me. I'm the girl, I'm the woman who got there in that place and looked to the left and the right, and I felt that the mystery had embraced me, this mystery. I think that it's there. It wants us to listen. Thin places, many of you may be familiar with thin places. It's a term that the ancient Celtics used, and they said that heaven and earth are only 3 feet apart. But in thin places, the distance is even smaller. It's right there. But if we open ourselves up to the thin places, it's even smaller. I want you today to take what you want from this, use it, but just for the main point is that you enjoy the thin places. Stand still, be quiet, turn off the television as we talked yesterday, and they'll find you. I thank you for letting me speak today.